Back when I was in high school, I remember that one time we were going to have a planned lockdown drill. I remember that we would have these about once or twice a year. Sometimes they would even tell us like the day before that we were having a drill. I think that was so nobody would be alarmed by it and worry that it was real. So on this one day, I knew that we were having a lockdown drill during the 5th period, which was the last one of the day. The drill would usually consist of an announcement, and then the teachers turning off the lights to their classroom and locking the doors. Sometimes they would make the students huddle in the back of the classroom. Other times we would just sit in our desks. My last period of the day was usually pretty boring, but I did have one of my best friends in that class, Ryan, with me. This particular time, I remember that after 4th period, Ryan said that we should skip 5th period. At this moment, we had both completely forgot about the lockdown drill. I just remember that I knew we weren't doing much in the class, and so did Ryan. It was basically like a work day, where we would just work on homework assignments and stuff. So being immature high school kids, we decided to skip class and head home early. We went to our lockers to get our stuff, and took our time as the bells sounded, indicating that class was now in session. We were in no rush, because the school was not super strict, and we figured we could just walk right out. After we left our lockers and started down a hallway, I remember that we heard the lockdown drill announcement. That's when we both remembered it. We figured that for the drill we had better not be out in the hallway, because a hall monitor might see us and make us go to class. Plus, we were sort of far off from the nearest exit doors to the school, so we decided to go find a bathroom until the lockdown drill was over. However, on the way there we soon heard footsteps behind us. We turned a corner and didn't look back, assuming it to be a hall monitor, so we walked faster and then turned another corner. When we did this, it sounded like the footsteps behind us were going faster as well. We quickly made our way to a bathroom and then went inside. Ryan went in one of the stalls and I went in another. We didn't close the doors to the stalls, but they stayed mostly closed on their own. Then we stood on the toilets so our feet couldn't be seen on the ground. A few moments later, we heard footsteps quickly approaching outside in the hallway. Whoever it was actually entered the bathroom, which caused me to be very nervous, and I'm sure Ryan was as well. We just stood there as quiet as can be. The person then entered the bathroom very briefly and then walked out pretty fast. It was like they just looked in really quick to see if anyone else was inside of it and then continued on. Now, Ryan and I both left our hiding spots a little bit quick. Probably like 10 seconds later we had left the stalls and started to walk out. When we left the bathroom, we noticed that the person was still in the hallway. It was a man, and he had made it almost to the other end of the hall, and he was walking facing away from us. But we realized that this likely was not a hall monitor. He was wearing just a black jacket and jeans, which is not something that a school employee would wear. After we got out into the hallway, we noticed the man stop and then start to turn around. Ryan and I both quickly went in the other direction of the hall and then turned the corner. We started walking down the next hallway very quickly, just trying to get away from the guy. As we continued though, we soon saw someone else up ahead. This was a teacher that we both recognized. It was Mr. Herbert, and he saw us and asked us why we weren't in class, saying that a lockdown drill was going on. We told him that we were sorry and would go to class. As Mr. Herbert walked with us, escorting us to our classroom, we told him about the other man in the hallway. He didn't seem to have any idea who we were talking about and said that he would find out. Soon we got to our classroom and were led inside. And several minutes after that, there was another announcement stating that the school was now having a real lockdown. Several times they said that this was not a drill anymore. This lockdown lasted for about an hour until it finally ended and the school got out at about the same time. We learned that the man we had seen in the hallways was not supposed to be in the school, and he was arrested for trespassing after hiding in the school. Nobody knew what his intentions were. I think it's really crazy how he just happened to be there during a lockdown drill. Did he somehow know we were having a drill and did it on purpose so nobody would suspect him or notice him? I don't really think so, but it makes for a crazy coincidence. I'm also really glad that he didn't look farther into the bathroom where Ryan and I were hiding. We both learned a valuable lesson that day not to skip class, and I don't believe either of us ever skipped again after that. I remember my first ever school lockdown that I was a part of. It happened my freshman year of high school, and I was about 14 years old. I was sitting in geography class, and the teacher told us that there was a lockdown and it was not a drill. I remember that he locked the door to the classroom and then turned out the lights, and we were told not to get up from our desks. Now, nobody knew what the lockdown was for, but very quickly kids started to speculate. Nobody seemed to think that it was that serious, and most kids were just joking around. They were saying things like the school probably got locked down because a man was seen jaywalking nearby. Most people thought that the city our school was in was pretty boring and nothing crazy would happen. I personally was very curious, but I was also not too concerned and figured that it was nothing really that bad. As more time went by, us kids were talking a lot, and the teacher told us to be quiet a few times. The lockdown ended up lasting quite a long time. The more time went by, the quieter the classroom became, and the more worried I became. After over an hour, it was finally lifted. I remember feeling very relieved. We had just one class left for the day, and I remember noticing several police officers standing around in the hallways. The final class period went by pretty normal, and then we were let out of school for the day. I continued to see several police officers throughout the school, and out front were a bunch of police cars next to the buses, and more officers standing outside. I still didn't know what the lockdown had been for though, but the police presence made things feel safer, but it also made it seem like something serious was going on and they were trying to protect the students. Now, I personally did not ride the bus home because I lived in a neighborhood behind the school. It was like a 10-minute walk past the school grounds and through another neighborhood to get to mine. So after school, I went around behind it and then went past the tennis courts and football field. Then there was another field before some grass and trees and residential houses. When I made it off school property, I walked down the sidewalk past these rather large yards to the houses there. One of the yards had quite a bit of trees in it and was basically a woods. I remember that as I was walking home and passed by this, I saw a man who was sort of hiding behind a tree. I noticed him and he noticed me as well. He looked very suspicious, and I instantly wondered if he had something to do with the lockdown. I tried to just ignore him though, and I kept walking. Luckily, he did not try to follow me or anything. I was able to make it back several minutes later and then arrived home from a crazy day of school. At this point, I was home alone because both of my parents were still at work, and it was like this on most days. They'd usually get back a few hours later. So I was hanging out around the house, and like an hour after I had gotten back, I was in the kitchen, which is at the back of the house. I remember looking out the back window to the yard. Just when I did, I saw a man come into view walking into the backyard. The yard was completely fenced in and was not very large, but we had a few trees and a shed back there. The man walked around the yard and then went behind the shed between the wooden fence. I recognized the guy to be the same one who I had seen on the way home from school. I was very creeped out by this, and I felt like the right thing to do was to call the police. So I went over and dialed 911 and reported the guy. Thankfully, he hadn't seen me looking at him through the back window. I kept an eye out back as I waited for the cops to show up. The guy stayed hidden back there between the shed and the back wooden fence the entire time. After police went out to him, he briefly tried to run away before he was caught. The police stayed at my house for a while, and my parents soon got home. I ended up finding out that that man was wanted. He had been seen inside of our school and had entered without permission. That's when the school went into a lockdown. The man fled the school and was able to get away from police. After it was confirmed that he was not on school grounds, classes resumed, but with heavy police presence. They were also searching for him in the nearby area, and that's when I had seen him behind the tree, and then in my own backyard. That was a really crazy experience, and I'm glad that everything turned out okay. I'm a school teacher, and this is the story of something that happened a few years ago. Looking back, I feel bad about what happened, and I wish I had done a better job handling the situation, but I've learned from my mistakes. So, I was teaching second period English class, and I had a class of about 20 students in it. My room is on the upper level of the school and about halfway down a hallway. This class in particular was mostly juniors and seniors and was a well-behaved class. So, I was teaching the class and then was going to give them some time to work on an assignment. After I started to let them work, I realized that I needed to get more worksheets and had run out. So down the hallway from my classroom there was a printer in the teacher's lounge, and I told the class that I would print off some more. I would only be gone for a few minutes, and then I left. I went down the hallway and then logged onto the computer in the lounge and found the assignment and started printing them. I was the only one in the lounge at this time. After being gone for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, I heard this sound come over the school intercom, At first, I didn't know what it was, but then I realized that it was a lockdown announcement. As soon as I heard this, I remembered my students. I knew that I needed to get back to the classroom immediately, and I quickly left the teacher's lounge. I literally started running down the hallway to get back to my classroom. When I got there, I tried to open the door, but it was locked. I was very confused and didn't know why. Soon though, I figured that the students were maybe following lockdown protocol and had locked the door. I started knocking on the door and tried looking in the window, but could only see the front part of the classroom, which was empty. Still, nobody was answering. I didn't know why, and after knocking a few more times, I called out, announcing myself. Then, I saw some guy come into view who I did not recognize. This was no student, but a grown man. He looked at me and then moved out of sight. Just after that, I heard a voice at the end of the hallway. It was one of my students. He yelled my name and said that I should get away from the classroom. I went over to him at the end of the hallway and asked what on earth was going on. My student told me that while they were in the classroom, some random guy just entered out of nowhere. He demanded everybody get out of the room immediately, so they did. All the students basically ran away, and the school quickly went into a lockdown. All this took place while I was printing papers, and I was completely unaware. The students had gone to other classrooms to take cover during the lockdown, so I went with the student to another nearby teacher's classroom. Meanwhile, police entered the school as well, and were able to locate the man who was still inside of my classroom. He locked himself in and tried barricading himself inside by blocking the door. Eventually, though, the police were able to get him to come out. I don't really know what his intentions were. I felt terrible for leaving my students and then the man entering the room. Since that happened, I've never left students alone in a classroom. When I was in high school, something really strange happened one time. Early on in the school day, I remember that I was in class and I left to go to the bathroom. This was something that happened all the time. I left the classroom and started walking down the hallway. When I was nearing the bathroom, I remember that I came across this woman who I assumed to be a teacher. She looked sort of professional, and we kind of crossed paths in the hallway. I had never seen her before though, and knew most of the teachers in the school, so I thought that maybe she was a sub. When I was walking by her, she asked me where a certain teacher's room was. I can't remember the name that she said, but it was a name that I had never heard before, and like I said, I knew most, if not all, the teachers in the school. I told her that I didn't know, and then I kept walking. I made my way to the bathroom and went inside. After being in there for like a minute, I left and went back out into the hallway. Right when I started walking back though, I heard the announcement for a lockdown over the school speakers. I started walking faster to get back to my classroom. A short time later though, I ran into the woman again. She was walking in the hallway and saw me once more. When she noticed me, she said that I was not supposed to be out in the hallway. She very confidently told me that I needed to come with her and to go to her classroom for the lockdown. I started to say that I was going back to my own classroom that I had been in, but she interrupted me and said no, I had to go with her. So at that point, I just said okay and started following her. She started to walk very quickly and we went down the hallway. At first, I couldn't believe how fast she was walking, and I was trying to keep up with her. I really didn't want to go to her classroom, but she wasn't giving me an option. So we went down 2 hallways, and she kept looking back at me like she was trying to make sure that I was still following her. Then we headed to the west wing of the school, which I was very familiar with. It was really just the gym and athletics area of the school, as well as some lockers and offices. There weren't really any classrooms over there. So at this point, I was very confused and also suspicious, because I knew this woman did not have a classroom over here. The longer I followed her, the more I got a bad feeling that got worse and worse, like I shouldn't be following her and I needed to get away. Then, one time when she wasn't looking back at me, I decided to just go back. I stopped and turned around and then just started sprinting back to my classroom. As soon as I did, the woman stopped and then started to chase after me. I ran as fast as I could, and at first the woman was right on my tail, but I was a lot faster than her and quickly able to pull away. I kept going and then made it all the way back to my classroom. I started banging on the door like crazy until I was let back in. I told my teacher about what happened, and she made a call to the offices. A while later, when the lockdown was lifted, I found out that the very same woman who had tried to get me to follow her was the cause of the lockdown. She had entered the school by breaking a window to an empty classroom. I'm not sure what exactly she wanted. She was not a substitute teacher at all, but was posing as one. Why she wanted me to go with her, I do not know, but I'm really glad that I followed my instincts and ran away, and that was the only lockdown in my high school career. It was crazy, and I'm glad that nothing like that happened again. I remember one really scary experience that I had back when I was in high school. I was a sophomore, and I used to ride the bus to and from school every day. One day, there was a pretty typical day of school. I went to all my classes, and nothing strange or unusual happened. When the last bell of the day rang at 2:45 p.m., school was out and we could go home. I remember that this time was always crazy and would be a mad dash to get to the bus on time. A lot of kids went to my school, and in between every class the hallways would be packed. So after school, it was always really tough to walk through the halls. And the buses left at just after 2:50, so you only had 5 minutes to get to them. On this day, I left my classroom and made my way to my locker. I had to go there to get something before going to the bus. This proved to be a mistake, because after literally running through the hallways and getting outside, I saw that I had missed the bus. I was really disappointed, because I lived too far away from the school to walk home. I also didn't have any good friends with cars, so I would have to wait for my mom to get off of work and give me a ride. Fortunately for me, my mom got off of work at about 3:30 or 4 p.m. usually, so I would only have to wait at the school for about an hour or so. So after calling my mom, I went back inside of the school, not really knowing what I was supposed to do. I had never missed the bus before, and had never stayed after school unless I had a sports practice. When I went back inside of the school, I saw that there were only a few students still inside, mostly just upperclassmen who drove themselves. Within probably 10 more minutes, the hallways became completely empty with just me walking down them. Now, my school did not really have any places to hang out at all. There were no study areas or couches or chairs set up. It was just hallways and classrooms, really. So I figured that I would just walk the halls while I waited for my mom to come to the school. I remember that I walked the halls for maybe 15 or 20 minutes. I made it towards the back end of the school, and things were completely empty. Then I heard this sound come over the school speakers. It was followed by an announcement that there was a lockdown and that this was not a drill. At first, I was very confused. I didn't know that there would be lockdowns when school was not in session, and I didn't really know what I was supposed to do in this type of a situation. Obviously, I was not in class and didn't have a classroom to go to either. I looked around at the classrooms that I was passing by, and all their doors were closed and they seemed to be empty. I kept walking, thinking maybe I would just leave the school altogether. That's when I came around a corner, and way up down the hallway, I saw this guy wearing all black and a ski mask on his head. I knew that something was up there, and I quickly went back around the corner. I saw the bathrooms and quickly went inside them. Once I was there, I stopped and listened to see if the person would go near. I figured the bathrooms were really the only place I could hide for the lockdown. For a minute or two, things were pretty quiet, and I didn't hear anything. Then I started to hear footsteps not far out in the hallway. They didn't really get that close though, but seemed to be a ways away. Moments later, I heard a very loud banging sound, like someone was smashing the lockers or something. I didn't know what exactly it was, but it made me feel on edge. These sounds went on for a while. Then, after about a minute or so of quiet, I heard more loud banging followed by the sound of glass breaking. It was from a ways down the hallway, but I no longer felt safe hiding in the bathroom. When things quieted down a little bit again, I knew that I needed to get out of there. I carefully went to the entrance of the bathrooms and looked out into the hallway. I didn't see anything, indicating that the sounds I heard must not have been within my sight. Then I quickly left the bathroom and ran the opposite direction to where I had heard the noises. I ran all the way until I got to the front of the school. When I got towards the lobby, I saw a police officer. He seemed a little bit surprised to see me, but I quickly told him how I had seen a guy in a ski mask and stuff. Another police officer who had entered the school told me to go outside the front door and they would handle it. I went out and there were several police cars. I waited there while the police went inside, and my mom got there a little while later. I was able to go home with her, and there were a bunch of police cars still there and the police in the school at that point. I went home and heard about the rest on the news. The police had ended up finding a guy inside and catching him. The man had simply walked inside the school wearing a ski mask after hours. Obviously it was suspicious, and he got reported. I guess he went around and caused a bunch of damage to the school, breaking windows to several classrooms and breaking other equipment as well. That must have been what I had heard. It was a very scary situation, and I'm glad that I was able to get out of it.